So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. If you've not come across me before, I'm Elaine Warner. I'm the Managing Director of Care Business Associate Training. I have worked within the L&D sector, working with people with learning disabilities and physical disabilities for the past 25, 30 years. And the topic that we're talking about today is very much close to my heart, and I am very passionate about it. And I will be hard pressed to keep it confined to the hour that we have. So that is a little bit about me. So my colleagues that are joining us today, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Hi, Giuseppe.
Hello, everyone. I'm Giuseppe Di Martino. I'm a psychologist and PBS coach, and I currently work as a commissioner with a local authority in the southeast of England.
Brilliant, thank you. And Alexis, hello.
Hi, I'm Alexis Stannard. I work for Fulcrum as the head of specialist services, which is for LD, learning disabilities, complex care and autism. So Fulcrum is a care consultancy agency. Predominantly my whole career has been in learning disability support.
Fantastic. So we're going to have lots and lots of discussions today. So not going to be death by PowerPoint, anybody. Literally, we are going to be talking about what PBS is and why it matters. And I think there's still a lot of kind of misunderstandings in relation to what PBS is. And it's certainly, you know, with the courses that we deliver, it's very much around, you know, helping people understand what it is and the importance. So we're going to be looking at that, looking at what should be in a PBS plan. And again, making sure that it is person-centred. And we're going to be referring to what's known as the 6 phases. And again, kind of documentation. Documentation is absolutely key. And I know Alexis is going to talk to us a lot in relation to, from a compliance point of view, what documentation that inspectors are going to be wanting to see. How we're aligning PBS with risk assessment, safety plans, other documentation. When you change one, you change the other, and it's about that continual reviewing process. And again, how we use those records to review, learn, and improve the services that we are delivering to the people who require it. So that is kind of giving us a bit of an overview. So Giuseppe, PBS, where do people start? What is it? You start us off.
What is it, PBS? It's very hard, actually, apparently. No one really knows what's PBS. There's still a lot of misconception. Let's start with what is not. PBS is not a way of managing behavior or of controlling people's behavior. There's never been such a thing. It definitely has its root in behavioral analysis, because that's the science that sits behind, although it's not the method that drives PBS. In simple words, just not to make an academic lesson here, PBS is just a person-centered framework, which is evidence-based. As we said, it's based on science. It is aimed to improve the quality of life of the people we support, maybe someone with learning disabilities, maybe someone with autism, dementia, maybe someone in children's services, adult services, elderly services. What we actually do when utilizing PBS, and the reason why we have PBS in place, is to improve their quality of life. How do you do that? The reason why PBS is so successful is because it focuses on what are proactive strategies, basically all the things that we can do before any form of distress appears. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, the behavior that you notice are somehow communicating something to you. There's not a challenge. I never liked it to call it challenging behavior, so I will do my best not to call them challenging behavior today as well. But what happens is when your service user is experiencing some form of distress, might it be sensorial, might it be due to the environment, might it be to the interaction, to the activities, or physical discomfort, what happens is what they are communicating to you towards those behaviors, that something is going wrong. Obviously, they may not have the word to say to you, they may not have the awareness of knowing what it is that is actually happening, or sometimes as it occurs, things happen with some form of delay and it's not very clear where the behavior is coming from. Therefore, what PBS does is to give this behavior some sense, some logic, some reason, understand that communication that is behind the behavior, addressing that communication proactively, and therefore reducing the likelihood of distress at the end of the day. So as you see, behavioral management is a sort of secondary effect, but not the reason why you would use PBS at the end of the day. You use PBS to communicate better, improve the quality of life, and as a result, if I'm engaged, I know that those around me are understanding what I need, and I have my needs met. I'm pretty sure that the likelihood of distress decreases quite significantly. I'm not saying it disappears, seldom does, but it will definitely become a manageable entity that may be easily worked out. Obviously, the reason why it matters for the staff, because obviously working in very complex situation in very difficult environments can have a bit of a toll on your team. And as we know, although you don't bring work at home, you do your best not to bring work at home. This is a job that is made of relationship. There's no way you don't get somehow involved, even if it's on a superficial level. That level of involvement in a complex settings can bring easily to burnout, frustration in seeing not being able to do something for the person you're supporting, because you want to help them. You're there to help them at the end of the day. Therefore, it helps your staff to have tools to actually support your service users. It helps your service user to be met where they are rather than when they need to be. You go and search for the meaning within their communication rather than to expecting them to communicate with you the way you would like it to be. You go and try to proactively, even before the needs arise, to work on the environment, to all the situation around the person and with the person themselves as much as possible, because PBS is definitely an active method. It's based on skills at the end of the day. So the way you involve them actually makes a lot of difference, and that's why PBS matters a lot. And if I have to be honest, having had quite a significant experience in operational management, it also matters at organizational level. It builds lots of reputation, it builds expertise, therefore it sort of qualifies your organization as a much more specialist entities than the average market around. It gives you an extra edge, so especially in the current market where and as a commissioner, I see every day the needs we are meeting and the demands that we need to actually address is getting more and more complex by the day. From children's services, there is an influx of a behavior of distress reported by a social worker or school. Therefore, we need to be ready to welcome this demand and not find ourselves sort of firefighting once again, as we've been in social care for a very long time, for many years. So if we have a PBS in place that organizationally gives us a bit of understanding, specialist and reputation, on a staff level gives us the tool and the expertise to support service user, for service user provides a tool to communicate effectively and actually improve quality of life, how would a good PBS look like?
Well, I'm going to stop you there 2 seconds. And I'm kind of just wanting to bring Alexis in with that. So obviously your entire background has been working, with specialist services. So from a PBS point of view, I think Giuseppe's kind of really summed it up really nicely. I love it where it's about quality of life first and foremost. That's why we're doing it. And all of the other kind of things come secondary with that. So from your point of view, Alexis, anything in addition to add what Giuseppe's already said?
I think for me, just as he's saying, but this is about a quality of life. This is ultimately there to support people in the best way that we can. And people have to understand that it's not just a PBS plan, it's a whole system approach. When I've developed services, it's right from the word go, we had PBS in mind. So you're developing the environment to meet the needs and to support people kind of under that process, and that it links and triangulates in all areas of their life, in all areas of their support. But the ultimate goal is quality of life, not kind of records of behavior. I think people get very confused with it. They think it's kind of looking at the function of behavior, and we do an ABC chart and we have a little bit in the support plan that says positive behavior support, and that's enough. But actually it's a whole system approach that actually kind of starts with the culture of the organization and the culture of the policy in place as that oversight of for the whole service. So I think people get very confused with that notion. Sometimes they think it's about kind of reactive management or proactive management, but it's far more than that, and kind of goes into all elements of support planning as well, and governance.
Absolutely, and I think that is really key, because certainly what Giuseppe was saying from a commissioning point of view, that more complexities are on the way, and it is about how we welcome that, and it is about as services to be not only just supporting the people they're currently supporting, but also shining the way for the people that's to come. And I think, again, the key thing about behaviour being a form of communication always, and I think kind of certainly when I'm told previously this behaviour has just come out of nowhere, and it's like, it hasn't come out of nowhere, it's come out of somewhere. We just need to try and find out where that was. It might not have been today, might not have been yesterday, might have been last week, last month. And it is about how we can then be doing that in a way, again, proactive as opposed to reactive there. So yeah. Thank you very much with that.
It's really important as well around the staff understanding that the whole culture, behaviour is always seen as quite a negative thing, where actually it needs to be really flipped and looked at as a strength-based thing, because ultimately you're right, it's communicating a need or a lack, and so when it's taken at that point and seen as something that's actually quite a positive tool to be able to understand how to support people better, it works perfectly in services.
It's interesting, and I really like you mentioned culture, actually, because it's there where it stands. It's really within the culture of a team, of an organization, of a specific service generally, that PBS sits. For a long time, we called behavior challenging, and I think here is the real, because words are like stones at the end of the day, let's be honest. So when you call something challenging, it makes me feel that you're challenging me at the end of the day. So I am the center of this observation, and you are kind of annoying me at the end of the day with this behavior. The narrative needed to be shifted completely, and I kept saying also to my staff at the time, it was very much, it's not that the person experiencing the distress is doing something to you. And also if they're doing, let's assume they're doing something to you. Okay, but maybe they're not having a good time anyway. So why don't we try for them to have a good time first? Because maybe they will not display the behavior at that point, and that's your solution. So is that narrative moving from, oh, this person is just very difficult, we don't know what to do with them anymore, to why is this person very difficult? It's simple as that, but for many years we didn't do that. And many people are coming through, and many people are already benefiting from PBS. Many people could definitely benefit from PBS, especially all those people that are still in secure residential unit, long-term segregation in hospital, residential settings where they're not free to live. I think there is a scope for PBS to be introduced if we shift that culture, because all starts with creating that collaborative, proactive team. I believe, Alexis, it's the same when you go about creating a team and within an organization, as you were mentioning before. I believe that's really where you start, finding
Absolutely.
the people culture at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think as well, when you set that good culture, you see this as a strength-based and a positive approach to supporting someone with communication and behaviour, and not as a ultimately it should reduce restrictions in services and increase support kind of decision making and capacity and a really good life. I worked in the service before, and under the kind of doing an MCA, this person used to rip their clothes all the time, rip their clothes in their bedroom, and so they said that he didn't have the capacity to understand how much it was costing him, so they locked the cupboard. I took over. I said, well, think about what the positives are for him. Why is he doing this? This behavior was a need. It was doing him doing something, you know, kind of a benefit for him. And so it's about looking at not just restricting things and how that relates to mental capacity. And it was about every week we had a budget. It was charity shop closed. There's the box of ripping clothes this week. And, you know, and thinking about things in a more creative way. I worry sometimes people use it to restrict, and it really shouldn't be like that.
Exactly. I had a lady, very interesting. We had a lady who used to draw on walls. And when she was in hospital, obviously this is bad. I'm not saying you should do it at home, but you know, probably there is a bit more of a leeway at home than in hospital. At the end of the day, all we did was to put boards that she could draw on so the property doesn't get damaged, and you know, there was no challenge anymore. Sometimes it's as little as that. Sometimes it's actually more complicated. But at the end of the day, is understanding that motivation behind, or finding a strategy that could sort of go around the stress in itself, or even better, finding an alternative behavior that could substitute the original one if it's something that the person is interested. As instance, if somebody has an interest in baking and gets distressed while they're waiting for dinner, maybe there is scope to introduce them to cooking, because they already have an interest in that area. And then maybe while they have that sense of agency getting involved in the kitchen, they will probably not show distress anymore because they are actively involved in the meal preparation. They don't have to wait for it. They're doing it actually at the end of it, as far as they can do, obviously. So as we said, we start forming a great team, as great as we can, with the culture we desire. And this is a job of relationship. So in a way, we should make sure that we match also somehow our service user preferences. I'm not saying you need to have the same interest, but somehow you need to know what service users are talking about at the end of the day. Might this be football, might this be video games, whatever there is out there. You invest in training. That's fundamental to develop a good PBS plan. Otherwise, they don't know what they're doing. So we don't really we don't really go into details of which sort of training, but there is a wide offer of training out there that providers can look into, from build to literally the options are infinite. I would recommend to do a proper PBS for qualification, obviously, at least for champions within the teams. And I would recommend a person-centered planning training, which is fundamental. I believe most providers do it anyway, so that should be great. At this point, we have our team. They've done the training. We have our service user. What do? We start understanding what behavior we want to understand. What is that the person is doing that is not clear to us? So we want to understand the function behind the behavior. In order to do this, we can assess with specific tools. From very simple one that could be the ABC chart, antecedent behavior consequences, from using red, amber, green system to map through the day the level of arousal and establish some form of patterns, to more specialist tools that could be the motivational assessment scale or the behavioral assessment interview. What we go and do, we isolate a single behavior and we start to observe what happened when the behavior manifests, what has occurred before, what has occurred afterwards. And we always have the focus as the service user. The reason why I'm specifying that is because one day on a report, and I'm not joking, a staff actually on the consequences talked about themselves. And we get to that in a minute, because you need to create that space for staff. It's fundamental, it's very important, but not on the service user documentation, possibly, if you could. We talk with the service user as much as we can. If you can engage with your service user from day one, that is actually already a start of a good PBS plan. Because PBS plan is all about agency, is all about improving that quality of life, is all about giving the person the possibility to participate in their day-to-day life. Once you assess the behavior or the behaviors and you have understood the motivation behind it, then you know already somehow what sort of communication you are trying to address. Therefore, what is expected at the beginning of your PBS plan is that you have a clear record, a clear plan of their communication. The way they prefer to talk, the way they express themselves, whether they talk or not, because you communicate whatsoever, not necessarily with words. Some people use talkers, some people use PECs, some people use Makaton, some people use pictures of reference. And it's up to you meeting them where they are, as we said at the beginning. Therefore, this needs to be very clearly detailed in the plan. Addressing the communication is 50% of a good PBS plan. Is really where everything starts. You need to make sure the way things are presented are clearly outlined in this communication plan, which is your first part. Therefore, you have introducing tools like now and then board. If your service user responds positively to this, and when you need to introduce activities, this is specified clearly there. You need to explain whether they have visual timetables, whether they have social stories before going out. You need to make sure that consistently the words that are used are the same if they are of a specific meaning. I remember having a lady, to be fair, it was over 10 years ago, but she used to use a funny word that was like a non-word, basically, to actually describe something very specific. I just can't remember what it was. But everybody knew that. And that was, and not only us around, even people in the shop nearby, it became a very common knowledge. And that's really what a PBS plan is. It's like, it's a village plan in a way. So this communication is the most important bit. What I also suggest more often than not is that you create maybe like a box, a folder with all the tools in it that staff can use there and then, because sometimes it can be very hard. And it's very clear whose member of the staff does what when situation happens. This all goes into your first part of your communication plan. Is immediately after your communication plan, which is your basically 90% of the plan, you will start mapping the person in themselves. So as you find in this slide, basically the person-centered aspect of it, what they like, how they do it, how they prefer, and everything needs to be very, very, very detailed. So we talk of their interests, their actions, what they are capable of doing, what they like to do. Basically, what you do is a strength-based plan. They will have 1,000 things that probably you will need to cater for. That's absolutely fine. We all know that. It comes in their care plan, and obviously we all expect that at some point there will be less and less. But there is definitely probably exactly the same number of great things that they can do, and they could build on that. There was a lady that obviously she was not able to look after themselves in terms of personal cares, in terms of meal preparation, but she was very able to take care of her house, and she was very able to decide by herself what to wear, what clothes to buy, where to put them, when to wash them. I think she had a bit of a passion for fashion in general. You start from there. Why not? I mean, that's the strength. You work with that, because in the relationship, you build on what works. You need to create capacity. You need to create confidence. So you need to do something that is achievable. Building a plan that is strength-based is your best bet. You need to have there a series of activities of their like, making sure that they build on the plan of every day, even when you have a timetable, which are great. I always love timetable. Even for myself, I love a timetable. But if your service user wakes up and today they just want to stay in bed, they need to have the right to do so. And that is a good PBS plan as well. PBS plan is basically building a real relationship with somebody, making sure that they feel at home as much as they can, and they are the owner of that home. They can decide what to eat, how, when, they can decide where and where to go. Your job around them is to facilitate all of this by giving them agency and by working on the environment around them to make it as easy as possible to them to navigate. Everything needs to be predictable. Everything needs to be somehow read, known. Nothing needs to be left to understanding. Nothing needs to be left to second meaning. To be honest, there is a thing that happens all the time I like to mention. Let's take a coat and go out. Okay, we are going out. Oh, wait a minute. I forgot to pick up. That wait a minute, it's a killer. That wait a minute is a behavior that escalates from 0 to 100 in a second. So you need to be very mindful of what you say. Again, PBS is about communication. If you say we are going out, we are going out, and that's it. We are not doing anything else now. Once you have this clear mapping of what they do, how they do it, how they actively participate in what they do, how you can involve them to participate in what they do, how do you make sure that their communication is addressed and their needs are met, obviously, it comes the more technical part, let's say, is the more specialist part.
Before you go on to that more specialist part, I just want to bring Alexis in kind of what we're talking about is like meaningful activities. And we were having a great conversation the other day talking about how we need to think outside the box and be a little bit more creative. You know, you could have George, who is, you know, he was a milkman. And so he's come to your service and 4 o'clock in the morning, his body clock is wide awake. Now, if you're trying to get George back to bed, he thinks he's supposed to be going and, you know, and doing the milking and doing his milk round. So how can settings adapt, Alexis, do you think, when it is about kind of really understanding that person and their background and their history in trying to kind of, you know, give meaningful activities? A lot of people confuse tasks with I can't give them that task because that's like pairing the socks, but you know, actually for that person that might be perfect. So how do you do that?
Absolutely. And a lot of it for me, it's around purpose, you know, that the whole point of people should have purpose in life. You know, I've done a lot of research on this and, you know, think about having the purpose of your life taken away. We get up in the morning and we have to get out of bed for work or children or to feed the dog or to see your husband and we have purpose to every day. And can you imagine that purpose being taken away? Like every day is Groundhog Day. It's kind of getting up to go to a learning disability group. And so for me, it's around and supporting people to find their purpose and using a strength-based approach. You know, the climate is always going to be hard. There's always going to be a lack of funding, lack of staffing, no driving, but we have to be a solution driven. There is always ways to kind of come together, work with other providers to do it. I supported 6 people to South Africa to build houses for 3 weeks. You know, there was no funding. We fundraised every weekend, climbed across the O2, raised £34,000. You know, was told I was kind of go big or go hard. That was my concept when I was overseeing services. And so, you know, we took people to Glastonbury Festival, 16 people to work for WaterAid. We did that for 3 years in a row, and it was risky and it was so much fun. We partied hard and we worked hard. But you know, then people, and I've lost people in Glastonbury, you know, but I'm the kind of what's the worst that can happen kind of thing, you know, they can't get out, you know, okay, it might be like a massive radius. And so it's really around finding them creative opportunities. You know, we had somebody that I used to support, she couldn't read. You know, so we would take that as quite you know, it could be used in a negative way, but actually she had paid employment doing the shredding. Perfect. Use her abilities and strengths to be able to find what works for her and what gives someone purpose. You know, I think long gone are the days where it's okay to expect people just to trot along to the learning disability group, swimming group or music group. You know, this is about real lives and individual lives and finding people's place in the world, really finding their own place in the world, and being as creative as you can to support them to really live a life of no limits, really a life where we're reducing the gap of equality between, you know, other citizens and people with disabilities.
Absolutely. And like you say, it's about, you know, if people are engaging, then, you know, from a behavior point of view, if they're enjoying what they're engaging in and they're finding meaning and they're finding purpose, then hopefully that will reduce any of the behavior that might then come if they're sat there not doing anything, bored, getting frustrated, feeling like nobody's listening to them. You know, so I never underrate those kind of, you know, meaningful activities, because that's the key of it. Because if we can get that right, then we'll hopefully stop anything escalating. So I'm not going to say it's not ever going to escalate, because we're working with people, and people kind of have mood swings, have hormones, have good days, have bad days. But if we can actually kind of, you know, be having them doing positive engagement, whatever it happens to be, whether they're children, adult, then that is, you know, going to be helping massively.
And I think, Elaine, one of the things about meaningful is meaningful to that person. I talked about big things, travel, and, you know, it doesn't have to be like that. It could be anything. I was reading an article a little while ago of two men with a learning disability had lived together forever. They were best friends. You know, they had spent kind of 10 years together. One of them became quite ill and he lost his mobility, and so was then using a wheelchair. And his friend just loved to support him with the wheelchair, used to help him in it, used to push the wheelchair around. And actually staff were like, no, you know, you're not staff, and health and safety and all the rules. And this man deteriorated because that had given him purpose. That's his best friend. But governance and health and safety and the kind of restrictions were put in place, so he couldn't do that. And no one had really identified the impact it was having on both of the gentlemen until they kind of looked at what that was. You know, for that person, helping his friend in a wheelchair, and actually let's remove all that red tape, you know, let's just document it, that's in his best interest, write a risk assessment and make it happen. Because, you know, we have to understand and identify what's meaningful to each individual, and that was meaningful to him.
Yeah, that is a perfect example. And I think that's what sometimes organizations kind of get a bit trapped in, where it's kind of, well, we can't have can't have them doing that. And it's like, why can't we? Why don't we risk assess it? Is it in that person's best interests? Can we be doing it in a, in a safe environment? What things can we be putting in place there? So thank you for that. So Giuseppe, that's kind of your first bit, is those meaningful activities.
It's extraordinary, actually, because yes, exactly. It's meaning and purpose is literally the specialist part of your plan, is creating that meaning and that purpose. What you do, as we said at the beginning, is to create what are called prevention strategies. Prevention strategies sounds like medical things, but it's not. It basically is putting in place all those purpose for you, those activities that are meaningful, addressing that communication positively in a way to prevent the increase of arousal and therefore the distress for that service user. Because, like Alexis was saying, there's nothing worse than waking up in the morning and not knowing what for at the end of the day. And we've been there, all of us, at some point in our life. Now think about your service user doing this literally every day of their life. I'm not saying you're doing a bad job. You're all doing a fantastic job, I'm sure. But sometimes services are limited in what they can do. So it's like, okay, breakfast at 9, then we go out at 12, then there's a communal activities, and then maybe you go to bowling. I don't know, just making it up, right? And it repeats like this over and over and over and over. You need to find that meaning. You need to find that sense. You need to find that what makes you click at the end of the day, right? In order to do so, I believe the best thing you could do is to sit down with your service user, possibly their carers, their families, their friends, their whomever has worked with them before, whomever they think is actually relevant in that setting to provide a feedback, understand what could potentially make a better day for them. As always, I suggest you start with one little thing, observe the outcome, and then build onto that. We get into a minute in how do you go on building into that. But more in general, what you actually do is making sure, first of all, to create an environment around where these flowers can actually blossom at the end of the day. Therefore, if I like to play piano, let's say, right? But there is road work next door. Maybe if my staff can close the windows so I can focus on playing the piano, or can give me headphones if there is a lot of things to work around for me to achieve my activities. What I'm trying to say is you work on modifying the environment to make it so comfortable for the person to be able to experiment, participate, and engage, because somehow we underestimate how overwhelming could be from a sensory point of view, from a cognitive point of view, the demands that we put on people. Let's go out and get a shower. Or take the soap and wash your hair. Take the towel. Have you done it? Can we go to get dressed? Take that. Would you like to put this on? Which one dress would you like? And what would you like for lunch? It's a lot of demands on you, isn't it? So why don't we shift all of that? And in the morning, we sit down with service user and ask them, what do you want to do today? Because if you don't shower for one day, let's be honest, it's not the end of the world at the end, right? I'm not advising not to do personal care, but you need to be flexible. It's a house, it's somebody's life. You wouldn't accept it for you. Then why do you offer it to your service user at the end of the day? So what you do building these strategies are basically what we can do for this person in terms of communication and environment to facilitate these activities that they would very much like to do, but cannot yet do because there's too noise, there's too much chaos, there's too many people, there's something that is stopping them. If the problem is within the access itself to the activities, then what you can do is work on some form of skill building. I'll make an example. There are situations in which you need to do something, even if you don't want to. The most clear example might it be because I worked a lot with children, but the clearest example is brushing teeth. Brushing teeth seems a very difficult thing. Apparently, it's a very it's like you really are torturing them for some reason. Nobody really knows why. But when they start to do it themselves, they actually like it. So what you do, there's two ways to do it. First of all, you make sure that the activity is enticing, can be liked, basically, because if I don't like to do something, maybe I don't want to do it, and that's just about it. So in the case of the brushing teeth, maybe a toothpaste with a taste that is acceptable, because they all taste a bit ugly today. You can find one that maybe your service user like, or maybe the toothbrush that is softer, harder, depending on their preferences. There's visual timers, there's a lot of things you can put in place. But in terms of introducing the activities to build that confidence, what you do is to start from the end of it. So whilst at the beginning you start brushing the teeth with them, what you do moving on is from the end of it. So from rinsing your mouth, you let them do by themselves. And so backward, and then backward, and then backward. The reason why you start from the last step is because the last step makes you achieve the goal straight away. Let's talk about baking pizza instead. That's an activity of like, right? I'll bring the lady I was talking before about. She loved to bake. Although there were a series of challenges in the like throwing stuff to stuff. Throwing things to stuff maybe creates less confusion actually. So we understood after a lot of errors, because it's a lot of trial and errors. You really need to observe the behaviors, record antecedent behaviors, consequences, how the person was, how was the environment, what was going on. In a minute, maybe we'll show a behavioral tool that you can use to, a series actually of tools that you can use. I wish there was only one. There isn't. So, what we did is, okay, the staff will do the most of the hard work of baking at the beginning, but she will join us in the kitchen once it's in the oven, so the risk is out of the way. And she can see it cooking and taking off of the oven once it's done, because a pizza takes 5 minutes, it's ready after 5-10 minutes. I have to say that once, first of all, the happiness of taking it, of taking the pizza out of the oven yourself rather than staff serving it to you for once was already a massive achievement. And secondary, another great thing was having the service user then wanting to do more of it, and then putting the toppings on the pizza, and then stretching the base, and then actually making the dough, and so on. So you build basically strength on strength. From achievement, they feel pride, they feel they can do it, and they do the following step. At the same time, it supports you to prevent some behaviors. So in the case of this lady, she was throwing objects because she was getting distressed of waiting for food. She didn't have to wait for food anymore. She was actually making it, and that resolved the problem. But in order for her to making it, we needed to introduce those skills. And the skills need to introduce in an achievable way. There are a lot of resources actually you can find online in terms of replacement behaviors or skill building, which I prefer to call it, because it's not that you're really replacing a behavior, you're actually introducing a skill to not get distressed, to be fair. But you always need to consider that this discipline, the scientific background of PBS, is a science of the beginning of the century and comes from medical science, where the person is a passive subject, is the medical staff doing things to them. Today is very different. So obviously we talk of skill building rather than behavior substitution at the end of the day. I've seen before on the screen the ABC chart. This is how you go and record your experiment, let's say. So today we bake the pizza. Okay, so antecedent, we try to bake the pizza. What happened? You try to be as specific as possible. Behavior, you say, oh, John took the spoon and threw it at Maria because he was angry. I would suggest you don't put this sort of assumption, but you can go into a bit more details and actually describe the behavior in itself. So rather than throwing the spoon, you can actually describe the action in itself, because maybe there are details that may be relevant when you go and build onto that skill. Once you have developed your proactive strategies, you do this obviously for each strategy as for each behavior. You can use motivational assessment scales, you can use behavioral function. These are actually very helpful questions, the one are on screen right now, because it helps you to understand why somebody might be doing that. I would suggest to do it either with the person or with those who know them better, because sometimes if we don't really know our service user, we can get confused. We can assume and interpret based on our own view of things rather than what it is. But with the time, you will start to recognize some sort of patterns into the behavior, especially if your record is accurate enough. Once you have your strategies, obviously, you also need to look into what are the reactive strategies. Reactive strategies comes of two ways. There are what we call amber strategies and what are the red strategies. Red strategies, we go into crisis management territories, of course. In terms of amber strategies, these are those situations in which you see the behavior starting to appear, some sort of telltales of the behavior. Let's say before shouting, I may start to scratch my chest. I've just made that up right now. I'm not saying that somebody has ever done that. I don't know if ever they will. If I see my service user scratching their chest, and I was good enough in recording my my antecedent behavior and consequences in my analysis, I would have understood that actually every time that John was shouting, just before shouting, he was scratching their chest. So I see them scratching their chest. I know they're getting in distress. I will probably have done a good work on the communication plan. I will know how to interact with John in that situation in order to bring him down to baseline with me, in order to manage that increase of arousal there and then, before it escalates into an actual possible incident at the end of the day. So we are still in a territory of starting to experience some form of distress. You observe those signs and you record all the techniques that have worked and have not worked. in order to understand how to better address that communication. As instance, you could offer some space. Is always the first things I would recommend everyone to do, because if you are getting distressed, having some time for ourselves helps us already to ground ourselves a bit. Obviously make sure that the environment is safe all the time, because there can always be the risk of injuries. I would suggest staff to remove themselves from the situation if they feel there is some form of danger. Otherwise, do not ever isolate your service user. It's staff removing from the situation, not the service user being removed from a situation. It's very important because that's an unlawful restraint. Actually, you should never do that. Even with those in place, I don't think that is an acceptable level of restraint anyway, because at the end of the day, the person still hasn't done anything yet. We are still in amber territory, we say. So a Cooper color code would be orange. It's very much similar. What we do is preventing escalation of behavior. What I find very useful, and I really suggest this to everyone, is to create a fact sheet, because your plan will start to become very big at some point, because you will record every behavior that you think needs some form of understanding or support or addressing somehow. And then you have your activities, and then you have your tools, and then you have your communication. So it becomes a very thick plan. What you do is a fact sheet where you quickly outline how to do the most recurring things and how to communicate in the standards of situation in order to always keep a level of arousal that is manageable. Because sometimes, especially if you have a high turnover, it's very difficult for people to remember all of it. A fact sheet tells you there and then what you need to do immediately, and can be very helpful. Sometimes can save lives. If your amber strategies do not work, so every form of communication that you thought may have helped in those situations has escalated the situation anyway, obviously you make a good record of it. You move to the territory of red reactive strategies. This is where you actively do something. This may be stopping whatever you're doing. This could be PRM medication in many contexts for people with learning disabilities, without going into the merit whether we like it or not. I don't, but it's necessarily evil in some occasions. It goes up to the physical restraint, mechanical restraint, every form of intervention, including breakaway, MABO, PROACT, all of them. They all happen when our communication has failed, when our proactive strategies have failed. What we do in those circumstances, we make sure to have clearly documented what the risks are, and we make sure to update those risks regularly when occurrences happen. Even when we go into amber territory, we make sure to update our risk assessment, because those are still near misses if you think about it. A situation that is about to escalate and doesn't escalate is basically a near miss. A series of near miss that are not addressed lead to a very serious incident.
So I'm just going to bring Alexis in at this point.
Yeah,
I know that,
exactly.
that there'll be a lot of people that will be either watching this now or watching this later that will be thinking, in reality, how easy to do that when you've kind of, you know, in service and there's lots going on at the same time. Because if this was kind of done in isolation, it would be, you know, it's already a very comprehensive process to be doing. So you've got staff that are doing that at the same time as looking after other people. So how have you found that you've been able to, you know, kind of help this be a robust process, but at the same time, it's kind of, you know, juggling all of the balls at the same time?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's ensuring that the staff team understand the culture, first of all, and also understand the people, the ins and outs of the people, that they're working with. So, you become, it's like, you get a second ear, you know what's going on in the corner of your eye, as well as just supporting that person there. And it's a real having that proactive attitude in a support service. Staff aren't sitting around, they're proactively engaging with all of the people they support. They know them really well. They've read all their kind of plans back and forth, and it's about revisiting it. So the more knowledge staff get, it becomes second nature to know the people, to know their strategies, to know what to do when it's escalated, and to kind of juggle a busy environment. And that's, one of the things that people need to understand is around revisiting with your staff team constantly the strategies, their MCAs, how it works in practice. We see time and time again failings. Actually, I was reading something the other day, CQC in this way don't mind, or they do mind, but if a document's slightly out of date, they want to know it's embedded in practice. They're more likely to be talking to your staff and understanding, if it's embedded in practice, do they actually understand the principles? How is MCA and best interest and daily decision making done in practice? So often do we see, yes, they've got the records, but it doesn't translate to what's on the floor. And that's the most important thing, I think, for me, is checking the staff's understanding of it. It's right for the manager to write a PBS plan and to know these strategies, but how well do your staff know them, and how well are they using them? And is it just a paper-based exercise? And for the staff to be in staff team meetings working on creative options. I heard someone tell me once that reward systems were for children, and I use reward systems a lot actually as a white mechanism in my service. It was someone who would, she just did not like having a shower, and we agreed it, her dad was a psychologist actually, with her, and that we would put, every time she had a shower, if she wanted to, we'd put a ping pong ball in this pot, and she chose the colors, and we painted the ping pong balls, and it became something on a Saturday she'd get a treat. And people, that was in her best interest as a grown woman at 30. We managed to de-escalate behaviours. Showers used to be an absolute nightmare. Have a really fun reward system in place, and actually then the staff and her got to go out on us every Saturday because she'd kind of won her award. And it's about being creative as well, and what meets the needs of that person.
I always think as well, like, PBS Plans is a collaborative piece of work. It's not for one person to do in an office and everybody then to follow it. If you've got night staff where behaviours might be very different at the night staff, it's like as soon as it gets dark, different behaviours come out. And if you're not engaging those night staff in PBS plans, then actually you're missing out on half the picture in relationship to it. So it's about kind of people see different things. And I think one of the kind of things that always, is important to me is about, the need for self-reflection within this. So we kind of look at the Bataris box where it's about, so I've come into work and maybe, I've got up late, the kids have got to school late, the traffic's horrendous, and that's then meant that I've got on a meeting late. So I might not be in the best frame of mind there. So then potentially that could then affect my behaviour, and I could then act differently, react differently to other people, which is then going to affect their attitude, which is then going to have a direct response to their behaviour. So as much as we like to, we say we leave our baggage by the door, we're human beings. And I think that PBS is also about people being able to reflect, and will kind of, I am really conscious of the time, and I did say to everybody we could be like literally talking about this for 3 weeks, but equally the importance of debrief after there has been incidents as well, and staff looking at what part did I play in that. And I think I think we might need to do a part 2, because I think we've just kind of scratched the surface, really. Just before we finish, from a documentation point of view, I think you're absolutely key that, yes, we need to have it in place, but actually what's more important is it's being utilised, and people are being aware of it, and people are giving the time to, get that information. I always used to think, working in children's services, if agency staff were coming in, and it's like, they're just, they're not given the time, because they're needed on the shop floor, they're not given the time to actually get to know the person, read the person's care plan, read the person's risk assessment. We kind of give them the edited highlights, and then we go, right, off you go then, go and interact with that person who doesn't know you. And then we then get the potential resulting behaviour. So, as much as, services ideally don't want to be doing that, we all know that sometimes the nature of the beast is that they might have to pull staff in at short notice. But, it's about kind of, we talk about the importance of routine, we talk about the importance of consistency and about knowing that person. And I think from a documentation point of view, and we can give you some resources following this, we'll send those out to people, kind of about it being person-centred, about it being trauma informed, about it, understanding that person's journey. If we think to the lady you were talking about with the shower, what if that person's been previously sexually or physically abused? And so that shower is then really triggering for her. And so that, her emotions are already heightened before she's even got into that shower. So it is about, doing it from that kind of person-centered. How are we writing it? How would that person like to be worded in it? How involved is that person going to be in it? And, Giuseppe talked earlier in relation to different communication aids. Could we record somebody's wishes and feelings and how they would like to be supported when they feel agitated? And it's picking up on all of the non-verbal clues with people as well. And so if their PBS plan doesn't then recognise their communication needs, then it's not truly person-centred. And it's about, really engaging that person with how best they want to be supported when they're feeling, agitated. So any last thoughts, Giuseppe? I think we will have to do a part 2 because we've not got through everything in this time, but I am just very conscious that people have given us their lunchtime, which is very appreciated. So kind of any last words from you, Giuseppe, and then we'll come to you, Alexis.
Just to reiterate the last point Alexis made, that exactly this is a team work. The plan is not made by the manager. That creativity needs to happen within a team. Everybody needs to participate, and the manager's job is to support that team to actually do that. So it's not one person job. The plan, as you can see, if you need to look at every behavior, basically never finish. It's like it's a document that updates every day with the person life at the end of the day. Therefore, make sure that all the team is involved, that all the team participate, and as well in the making as in the monitoring of it.
Brilliant, thank you. Alexis, any closing points?
No, I suppose it's just that PBS compliance is just like Giuseppe said, it's not about controlling behaviour. It's about kind of protecting rights, reducing restrictions, and designing services where people can flourish. And
I always think we kind of, again, going back to what we talked right at the beginning, it's reframing the narrative. It's looking at behaviour differently. We always refer to not using the phrase attention seeking, it's attention needing. And if we look at a behaviour as a form of communication, this person has a need and they're trying to tell us something very loud and clear, and we need to work out what that need is and how best to meet it. So we have really kind of just touched the surface with that. So what we are going to send out to people is the tool that we had before, which Giuseppe referred to, the behavioural tool. There is a template that we can send out to you on, kind of what would need to be in a PBS plan, and giving you kind of headers that should be in it if you're not already using them. If you are using them, go back and reread them and read them from that person's point of view. And, you should be kind of reading it thinking, if somebody brand new came into service who didn't know this individual, would they get a sense as to that person's needs? And, and that's at every level, day staff, night staff, everything in between. So we will send out some information, but if you think that you would be interested in us doing a follow-up on this, because PBS is absolutely huge, if you can let our team know either in the chat or when they send an email out to you. And then, you know, if anybody does want any support with their PBS, I know that Alexis and Giuseppe and myself would all be very willing to give our time to people in relation to how people can go about and doing that and what training is available. And PBS, done proactively, works. And just on a closing note, one of the large organisations that we deliver training to, in year one, we went in and they either had 2-day breakaway, 3-day physical intervention and restraint in some services. So then after that year, everybody did that training. The second year, the cases have massively reduced because the staff are now using the tools that are being taught to them in relation to PBS, and they're then not having to then, you know, do the breakaway training or the physical intervention or restraint training to as much degree, because the PBS is working, helping that person get the support they need. So thank you so much, Giuseppe and Alexis and everybody else that has joined us for your Friday lunchtime. I hope it has been helpful for you. I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I say, us three we'd still be here till a week next Tuesday, still talking about things, all PBS. But we will kind of draw it a close for there. But yeah, we will definitely, I think, have a follow-up and go into some of those aspects in a little bit more detail. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.